I would say that that's actually another reason why it's important to talk about it, because, it's one thing thinking, do I want to be pregnant? Do I want a baby? But in a way, when you are pregnant, that question is too late. The question now is to address, well, what is pregnancy? And so I think like having a conversation to help people kind of uncover that truth that they know, that to be pregnant means you're having a baby.
You're already a mum.
Exactly.
You're
exactly.
already a dad.
Yeah. Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm here with the lovely Rachel Mackenzie from Rachel's Vineyard, the post-abortive ministry, and we're going to be discussing how to effectively talk about abortion. In fact, this is the first in a mini-series where we're really going to get into this topic to help you learn to talk effectively about abortion. There's many reasons why people don't talk about abortion. Sometimes it's because we just don't feel equipped, don't feel we've got the knowledge. Sometimes we feel embarrassed or awkward. Sometimes we actually think we might make a bad situation worse or embarrass or upset someone else. So there's many reasons why people don't talk about abortion. But I often speak with pro-lifers who are very capable of talking about abortion, and yet they still don't. And this leads me to the first point that we're going to discuss today, which is why we need to talk about abortion, because it's that why which gives us the motivation to starting pro-life conversations. So thank you for joining me, Rachel.
No problem.
Let's start by looking at that then. Maybe for yourself, why do you think is a key reason we need to talk about abortion or talk more about abortion in our everyday conversations?
I actually think it's the number one fundamental issue. If we haven't got the right to life, then we haven't got the right to anything else. And I know there's lots and lots of issues, in ministries that are so important. And, the homeless, it's endless, isn't it? And, overseas projects. But if we haven't got the right to life, none of the others matter.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when I'm trying to share that with other people, it can be misunderstood that we're saying that these issues maybe aren't important or, of course, like you, I will give time and money to help these causes and blessings upon the people who champion those causes, whatever they might be, sickness, poverty, like you say, mental health, homeless, whatever it might be. There's lots of problems in our society that seriously need addressing. But if we don't have that right to life, then all other rights, every other right, it is meaningless. And I think this issue, really has such depth and gravity and magnitude that there isn't with other issues, because it affects people physically, mentally, and spiritually. I mean, physically, for example, I'm sure with the work that you do, you certainly see people who are physically impacted, to say nothing, obviously, of the child, but women and men who are physically impacted by abortion.
Without a doubt, the endless women that hemorrhaged after having the pills by post or having going into hospital and having a surgical abortion and the aftermath of that. I know women that have had to have hysterectomies, that can't have children because of it. And even for myself, as well as I couldn't have children after the abortions I had, it was one of the I think the most devastating impact of my abortions is not being able to have children afterwards. But also it affected a lot of my other organs as well. I began to have horrendous acid indigestion, and it was all the trauma from the abortion.
Wow.
So it does physically, without a doubt, and like you say, mentally as well and spiritually.
Yeah, and I was going to say this is why I say men, we need to recognise that as well, because obviously the mental health of men are affected, and that can affect their physical health. So for men it can end up being a physical thing as well as mentally, because it can even cause things like suicide and things, suicidal ideation. I know that's something that can be in post-traumatic stress for people who've been through an abortion.
Without a doubt, and very often that's how it does affect men, and it takes away their their belief that, that they could have been a father, would have been a good father. The suicidal ideation definitely comes into that anger at such a level, that they actually describe it as murderous anger that they have afterwards for this.
And I know the people who will sometimes say, well, I know people who've had an abortion and aren't impacted by it. I would actually say if you've had an abortion and you think that that's fine and that you're fine and that everything's fine, in a way you've been impacted more, because from a mental health perspective, you're not in touch with reality. The reality of the fact that a human being has died, and your own humanity, that you should be having compassion towards other people, which includes the preborn who obviously have their lives ended. So to be out of touch with reality is not good for
Well, you're in
mental
that
health.
first stage of grief, you're in denial, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah. And then, like we say, spiritually as well. And this is where it's often different from other, whether it's social justice causes or charities that people might champion, that might affect people physically and mentally. But there is a spiritual element, isn't there, with abortion? And I'm sure you must see that with people that are looking for healing, that it's often only when they maybe begin to open themselves up spiritually to the truth that healing can really begin to take place.
Exactly. When I think about Genesis and I think about Adam and Eve, when they committed a sin, what did they do? They went and hid. And very often people who've had abortions won't go to church anymore because they believe the lie that they've committed the unforgivable sin. And whether people are aware of that, people that were going to church before are very aware of it. But there's another group that actually, through their conversion, that's when they realise the magnitude of what they've done. And as a Catholic, when I had an abortion, I committed a mortal sin. I was going to hell. And it wasn't because it was unforgivable, but I hadn't gone to confession, I hadn't looked at it. And so for me, yes, emotionally, mentally, physically, but for me, the worst thing that I did to myself was the spiritual side of this.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important point, touching on what you've just mentioned there, because for a lot of people, we know that, if it's something really serious we've done wrong, then to pick up that kind of burden of the shame that can be associated with it, if we don't know we can put it down somewhere, it's just too much to pick up. It's if you imagine that you had like a sack of rubble in your living room, if you didn't know there was somewhere where you could actually go and get rid of it, why would you pick it up? You wouldn't pick it up just to carry it eternally for the rest of your life. It's only because we know effectively, you can take that sack of rubble and outside the door there's somebody who's willing to take it from you, Jesus, that we then feel that we're able to pick up that burden to start with and take ownership,
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the healing is. That's when you start getting better. Yeah.
So when you were younger, Rachel, I'm sure that you'd maybe be almost surprised to see yourself now talking about abortion a lot. I certainly don't imagine in the days when you actually supported the position of abortion in some way, that you thought that you'd be engaging with people, whether it's random strangers, I know you do on the train or whatever it might be, or those around you, friends and family. Did you ever in those days see the pro-life message or hear about it in society or media or?
I didn't in society or media, but I did in the classroom. I went to a Catholic school and there was it must have been a module where we did a section on debating different issues. And for one lesson, we touched on abortion and we watched the silent scream. And we had to either be pro-life or pro-abort and debate it. And I was really verbal about it, and I was standing up and this is wrong and this is
so you were on the pro-life perspective.
Absolutely,
yeah.
I was, all the way. And for me it was horrendous, and my sister was even more passionate and actually went on a few different rallies back in the day, but that was it. That's as much as I had.
I think that's actually a really important point to bring up, because I've heard similar things to what you've just said from so many people who've been through abortions. They'll say, I remember at school I watched a video, or I remember a book being shown us in the RE lesson or whatever it might be. Yeah. And it's such an unusual event. It was literally a one-off thing that they heard at 14 or something. As though that's enough to keep somebody understanding the perspective and keep you strong in your beliefs for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think, we need to keep that conversation going
Yeah.
after the lesson that they have at age 14 or whatever, the video that you might have been shown at secondary school. That's not enough to help somebody with, all the difficulties and pressures they might be facing in the rest of their lives, is it? So
absolutely. And also, when you think about, you've got the pressures of the media and how they sell abortion and the world, but also then when somebody is pregnant and they go to the medical profession, they sometimes face obstacles there too, don't they?
Yeah. And I think particularly when somebody finds maybe there's not something perfect about this pregnancy, there's a heart defect, or, this child might have a cleft palate or something, that can often be a time, when I'm hearing this from women, that again and again and again abortion is presented not just as an option, but as the responsible option, as though this is what you almost should do.
Yeah.
When
it's the best thing you could do for your child.
Yeah.
I mean, how can the best thing for our children be to kill our children?
I mean, I remember my own mum telling me that when she was pregnant with my older sister, which would have been her fourth child, very much wanted and desired pregnancy by both her and my dad, just going to the doctor to confirm that she was pregnant, and the doctor said, Mrs. Vaughan-Spruce, this is your fourth pregnancy. Are you sure you don't want an abortion? And when she said, I most certainly don't, and, if my husband were here, he wouldn't be happy to hear you suggesting that either. He was like, oh, well, your husband's not here. We just keep reaffirming that. When she'd expressed no desire whatsoever to have an abortion, it was a very much wanted and planned pregnancy. But like you say, they're actually, putting the seeds in people's heads sometimes, let alone the ongoing pressure that there can be.
I know there was a woman, and this was I've heard this time and time again with friends, that when somebody is faced with the possibility of their child, or their child has got Down syndrome, that it's straight away the medical profession start with, I'm sorry to tell you, I'm sorry to tell you, as if Down syndrome is some sort of, something
they need to make apology for and be sorry about. Yeah. It's a risk,
we had a friend, didn't we, that
yes.
Do you want to talk about
yes
that?
A couple that I know we both knew, 100% pro-life and active, and I remember them saying to me, will you pray for our daughter? She's at risk of having a child with Down syndrome. And I remember saying to them, I'll certainly pray for your daughter, but do you really think this is a risk? Because I don't think children with Down syndrome are a risk. And immediately they said, oh gosh, I can't believe it. We're repeating the words that the NHS has told us, and we don't even believe it ourselves, all this sort of negative language that's being used. And it just becomes part of our language as well as pro-lifers. Yeah. So I think talking about it can help reassure people that it is okay to continue a pregnancy when, even if everything isn't going perfectly and the child might not be exactly as we expected and fulfill all the hopes that we have, it's still okay to continue with that. And exactly. That conversation can reassure that. Yeah. And the pressure can come from elsewhere as well, can't it? Other than medical professionals.
Very often it comes from, and sadly, it comes from the fathers. It does come from the boyfriends and the husbands, where women have told me countless times, that they wanted this pregnancy. They very much wanted this baby, but they had to get rid of it. Or they had to stop the pregnancy because my boyfriend would leave me. They were forcing me into a situation. We can't afford this child. What about the other children we've got? How are we going to look after them? And the pressure that was put on them, that they could see no other way out.
This year, you and I were both at a Catholic youth festival, Youth 2000, both giving workshops there. And I don't know if you remember, there was another talk that a young woman very courageously gave, and she was talking about how when she was at university, she was in a very coercive relationship. She wasn't pregnant, that wasn't the issue that she was addressing, but what she was talking about was how embarrassed she actually felt. She said, I felt kind of embarrassed and ashamed that I should have got myself into this manipulative relationship, and consequently she didn't tell anybody about it. She didn't have the strength to get out of it herself. And like I say, just felt that it wasn't something that she could confide in others. You can imagine the isolation experienced by people in those kind of situations who do find themselves pregnant. Maybe like her, just feel too embarrassed to talk about it. Me, a strong woman who's in this relationship being manipulated, And it's just maybe seems the easier thing just to go through with it and have the abortion.
Exactly, because nobody's talking about it. Like you say, you know, the world shuts this down as a conversation. The women don't know who to talk to. They don't know where to go. Often women say, you know, and I describe it at Rachel's Vineyard, it's as if somebody's put a hand over people, that the isolation has shut them up and then shut them down. And then it seems the only way is to have an abortion. And as soon as they've had the abortion, suddenly their voice is there. And often the first voice they hear is their own, is a scream. You know, that, oh my gosh, I could have spoken up, but there was nowhere to go in that.
And that, I remember actually once when I was, the first job I had, a colleague of mine, a young woman, and she asked me if I could do her shift for her the next day. She said, I've got a doctor's appointment. Is there any way that you could cover for me? Trying to be a helpful friend, I was like, yeah, sure, of course I can, no problem, I can do your shift tomorrow. It wasn't until the day after that I found out she hadn't just been going to the doctor, she'd been having an abortion appointment. And gosh, how I wish when I look back then that she'd known that I might have been there for her and would have been able to help her and direct her. So just talking about it, you know, in a work environment, you never know who might be the one to need it. She didn't have that written on her forehead. You know, no one could tell just by looking at her that she was in that situation where she just felt that the only option that she had was an abortion. So talking can maybe bring these things to light.
Without a doubt. I mean, for me, you know, I can't bring back my children, but I can help prevent somebody else going through what I went through. And it's like that number one issue. It's my number one conversation. I'll be on trains, I talk about it. My husband, you know, he can't believe it. There'll be a workman coming to the work, you know, I'll go, he's had an abortion, this one's had two. He said, how on earth do you work it out? And I said, I'll just make all conversations go that way. And, you know, 4 times a year I have to buy a huge amount of flowers for the memorial service. And these women and men deserve the very best. So, you know...
This is part of your Rachel's Vineyard retreat, yeah.
You know, and I do, you know, the memorial service is so important. So I buy all these beautiful flowers. And because I'm buying so many, you know, people around the counter, everybody always asks, oh, what's this for? And I go, it's for a memorial. And immediately they're like, oh, we shouldn't be talking about that. And I go, oh, it's a memorial. It's for, I'm supporting women and men who've been traumatised because they've lost their children through abortion. Those conversations is where a woman is, you know, on the counter has said, I never got over mine. Or I've had to give a card to somebody else. So we've got to talk about it all the time.
Yeah. So looking at those people then, maybe like the woman that I was mentioning at my place of work, you know, who are in that situation, who are pregnant, why is it particularly so important for them to hear abortion coming up in conversations?
They need to know, for me, they need to know where to go. They need to know that I can actually speak to this person. You know, for me, when I was teaching in the Catholic school, there was such a passionate religious woman there that loved Jesus, but would often talk about abortion and different things. I knew she was the woman I needed to go to actually, first of all, confess to somebody, because I was being blackmailed over my abortions. I had an abortion because I knew I'd be met with love, you know, and I just wish before that, you know, 5 years before, I just wish she'd have been in my life, that people I knew where to go, who to talk to, other than making the decision in my own head.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to actually say that word abortion in our conversations, because it's almost like sometimes a bit of a taboo word, isn't it? So I think sometimes that they've just heard you say it, okay, you've brought it up with me in whatever context, I can now bring that up with you, and it just sort of almost gives that okay. We hear quite a lot from women, you know, that people who've had an abortion have thought long and hard about their decision. But I know that from the experience I've had of talking to people who are maybe post-abortive is actually, whilst they maybe have thought long and hard about whether they want to be pregnant, they haven't actually thought long and hard about what abortion is and what pregnancy is. And I would say that that's actually another reason why it's important to talk about it. Because, you know, it's one thing thinking, do I want to be pregnant? You know, do I want a baby? But in a way, when you are pregnant, that question is too late. The question now is to address, well, what is pregnancy? And so I think like having a conversation to help people kind of uncover that truth that they know, that to be pregnant means you're having a baby. You know,
you're already a mum.
Exactly.
You're already a dad.
Yeah. And like you say, for men to hear that too, because that's something that we don't hear about hardly at all in society. So for men to hear that, you know, for that reality to sink in, because often it can be harder, can't it, for the reality to sink in for men because it's not physically happening to them. Like you say, for them to hear, you are already a dad, you know. I think that's a really affirming thing for them to hear, even if it might not be something, you know, even if it's not a situation that they're in yet, so that when they, you know, do get into that situation, if that does happen, that might be a memory. Oh yeah, I remember hearing that when pregnancy happens, you're already a mum and you're already a dad.
Exactly. I know at Rachel's Vineyard, the amount of times when women and men realise, oh my gosh, I'm a dad, I'm a mum. There was one father I'm thinking of in particular, actually there's two, but one in particular, he'd got 3 children at home, and him and his wife had an abortion. And I said, you're a father of 4. And you'd thought I punched him in the face, that he was just so stunned. Mm-hmm. And it was the end of the Friday evening, and on Saturday morning he came back in the room, and he said, you got me last night. And I went, I know, you're a father. And he went, how did I not see that? Like you say, they do know, but it hasn't been brought up because nobody's talking about it. Yeah. And yet that's where the healing is knowing what's happened. But we need to get these conversations in, so we don't have to keep running Rachel's Vineyards, you know, that we're actually running, you know, centres to help these women with babies and help the fathers be the fathers that were meant to be.
But like you're intimating there, it is important for those who've had abortions to also hear about it as well, isn't it? Because I know sometimes that can be actually what prevents very good people from talking about abortions. And I've heard this a lot from people, but, you know, what if somebody has had an abortion? Or I think, you know, my sister or my cousin or whatever has had an abortion. So is it almost being a bit insensitive to bring up that topic? You know, what are your thoughts about those sort of situations? Can we still effectively talk, and why is it important for them to hear then?
I think it's more important for them to hear it than anybody, because they need, that wound is there, whether you want to cover it up by not talking about it or they want to cover it up by you being quiet. It needs to come up. That wound needs to be dealt with and needs to be sorted and helped, because, you know, what isn't repaired will be repeated. You know, I often say, don't I, you know, about that repeated abortions is a sign of significant trauma. And that's what will happen if we don't talk about it. You know, I needed somebody to talk to me. I needed, and for me, it was my mum, you know, that talked about it endlessly and would nag me. Thank goodness she did. And you know what? She was met with anger for so long. But she never gave up. And it was thank goodness, because otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. You know, because she knew I wasn't angry with her. I was angry what had happened. And I just, eventually, that's what led me to Rachel's Vineyard. We've got to talk about this.
Exactly. It gives you that opportunity then to direct people to where they can get healing. And not just that healing, I think that understanding of what went wrong, you know, what led me to make, you know, such an awful decision, you know, and to really understand what their part in that was, maybe what their part in that wasn't, and what was maybe someone else's part in that. But to be able to understand yourself and what went on it is, again, something that can be really helpful for right here and now, but in anything that might come up in the future, whether that's a future pregnancy, and, you know, just living their life as a mum or a dad as they are now, to understand themselves, and by talking about it, I think we can do a lot with that.
Because you've got to work it out, otherwise you'll repeat it again. And very often when people come to Rachel's Vineyard, the balance of what they're carrying, often they're not carrying enough, that they've got to look at, well, what was your part in that? Or they're carrying other people's too much. And it's having that balance of picking up what belongs to you, and then, like we say, you know, putting it at the foot of the cross where it belongs. But you've got to look at it first.
And I think if you listen to you know, psychotherapists like Jordan Peterson or some, you know, people like that, people that you know, most people have heard of nowadays, there's something that you'll hear quite a lot of them say, which is that generally, us women talk more than men.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is because that's how we process our thoughts.
Yeah.
So, if I'm coming back home from work and I'm telling, a family member about something that's happened, and then I tell someone else about it and someone else, it's not necessarily because I all think that they're so interested in it. It's maybe because I'm trying to process what's happened, maybe particularly if it was something difficult or, something that I found disturbing in some way. So that's how we process our own thoughts. So I think particularly if you don't talk about abortion and we shut down that conversation, then particularly for women it can have a really damaging effect, because it actually affects their thinking process. This is how we think as women, is by being able to verbalise,
talk it through,
internally,
talk it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think just beginning to kind of bring this to an end then, Rachel. I know. If we look at the fact that we've had like 55 plus years, what is it? We're on 20, so over 55 years now of legalised abortion in this country. We've become very desensitised, haven't we? And even those of us who are pro-life, I don't think our hearts hurt as they should. Even if they're really tender hearts, we don't hurt as they should do when we're looking at this issue of abortion. And that's sometimes something that can help motivate us, is kind of feeling that hurt and that empathy towards other people. And I know sometimes you've said to me that you're almost tired with having to talk about abortion, but that when you've held another Rachel's Vineyard retreat and you're hearing those stories, it almost like reinvigorates you with that passion to talk about it again. So would you say that actually hearing those stories are something that can actually help motivate us?
Without a doubt. It's, for me, I'm in a very privileged position that I always say at Rachel's Vineyard, your tears is sacred. And it's not just the participants that cry, all the team, we're all in bits. How can you not be at a memorial? And I've often said, if I ever do a memorial and I'm not drying my own tears up, I'm going to stop doing it. I can't be numbed to this, but not everybody has the privilege of seeing what I see and the wounds and the healing that's there. But we're desensitised to it, get on with our lives. And it's just a number. This huge number of 10 million more abortions. We can't imagine that.
And I think for those people, I think one thing can be to actually listen and watch those testimonies. So, for instance, I know on our own March for Life website, we have a video library, people who've had abortions, men and women who've been affected by abortions. And also it can be good to listen to those stories of people who've maybe considered abortion or very nearly had an abortion and at the last minute changed their minds. And you realise the difference that meeting somebody pro-life can make, or offering some support can make. Yeah. So I think those kind of things can really help, form our hearts and give us that motivation to bring it up in conversation.
Yeah.
I think just one maybe last thing, and maybe to address anyone who's really watching this at home or wherever you might be listening to this, I think to maybe help form our own hearts and to really motivate ourselves. One of the things that I found effective is creating a parallel situation, something that maybe we can help to personally touch our own hearts. And to give you an example, this is something that I know I've used with quite a few people. If you went to listen to the news, or you picked up a newspaper or looked at the news on your phone, however you find news, and you began to read a story, and the story was saying that there'd been a terrible situation and all the children in your local primary school had been killed. That would immediately alert you. You're thinking, gosh, that's the school just down the road from me. And as you read on in the article or continue watching this article, whatever it might be, you read how not only were these children killed, but they were killed by their parents. Their parents were part of a cult who were taught that they'd be better off without their children. And so they poisoned all their children in their, put something in their lunch boxes and the children all ate it. And worse still, that the teachers knew this was happening and they just stood by and let it happen when their children were at school because they were part of the cult as well. They were all brainwashed into thinking that they'd be better off without children. Now, what wouldn't you or I start to do if we heard about that situation? Maybe we'd phone a friend and say, did you hear about this? This is my local school. Isn't this just horrendous? And imagine your friend said, did you not hear the same thing happened at my local primary school just yesterday? It's a cult and it's sweeping the whole country. What can we do about it? There would be a national outrage, wouldn't there? And, we'd be maybe, starting fundraising to help get support for these people, to help create awareness. Those who'd been part of the cult, we'd be encouraging them to speak up about, how they were brainwashed and how this happened. We'd certainly be praying about it in all our churches. We'd be creating leaflets and posters to create awareness, support groups, you name it. And I'm sure you can see the parallel that it is the equivalent of a primary school worth of children, if not more now, every single day in our nation that is being wiped out through abortion. And yet we aren't having that public outrage and we aren't responding as we should. And one of the ways that we should respond is by, at the very least, talking about this issue to help create awareness. So I really hope that maybe after today, after listening to what Rachel and I have been discussing, you might just begin to feel that motivation. And if not, maybe try and create a parallel situation for yourself to help that sink in, and watch some of those testimonies so that you feel some of that motivation to talk about abortion. And then once you've maybe felt a little bit that way, that your heart is being moved, you can watch the next in this series that's going to be made, which will be looking at who we need to think about when we're talking about abortion. And that might seem obvious, but there's a lot to that subject to be discussed to make sure that we're really effective. And then we can actually look at how we can talk effectively about abortion and what to expect when we do. So watch out for the future episodes of this series when we're going to look a little bit at all those topics, the not just the why, which we've looked at today, but the who, the how, and the what to expect. So please share this video with others around you, like it, subscribe to it, and maybe this can be a starting point for even just those around you, maybe even just your fellow pro-lifers, to begin to talk about abortion and get that conversation started with those in your family, your friends, and the wider society, both in person and online. And thank you for joining us.